Imagine a time when society was on the brink of a cultural revolution, a time that gave birth to a genre of music that would change the world. That time was the 1950s, and the music was rock and roll. This explosive era of music was sparked by a fusion of rhythm and blues, gospel and country music. It was a sound that was fresh, rebellious, and absolutely irresistible. This was the music that introduced us to the gyrating hips of Elvis Presley, the electrifying guitar riffs of Chuck Berry, and the soulful beats of Little Richard. The 1950s were a time of significant cultural and societal shifts. Post-war prosperity was on the rise, and with it came a newfound sense of freedom and individuality. This was the perfect breeding ground for rock and roll, a genre that embodied the spirit of rebellion and the desire for change. And so, in the midst of societal change and cultural rebellion, rock and roll was born, a genre that would forever change the landscape of music. As this new sound echoed through radios and jukeboxes across the nation, a particular generation was listening, a generation that would be defined by this music. They were the baby boomers. Born in the aftermath of World War II, between the mid-40s and early 60s, the baby boomers were the first to grow up with rock and roll as the soundtrack of their youth. It was a rhythm that matched their heartbeat, a beat that was fast, loud, and rebellious. It was different, it was new, and most importantly, it was theirs. Rock and roll became more than just a genre for the baby boomers. It was an attitude, a way of life. It gave them a voice when they felt unheard, a platform to express their hopes, dreams, and frustrations. It was a catalyst for change, not just in music, but in society as a whole. This generation had the audacity to challenge the status quo, to question authority, and to fight for what they believed in. They were the generation that stood up against racial segregation, fought for women's rights, and protested against the Vietnam War. And rock and roll was their anthem. Songs like Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind and John Lennon's Imagine became anthems of peace and unity. They sparked conversations about civil rights, war, and equality. They urged listeners to question, to dream, and to act. Rock and roll influenced not just what the baby boomers listened to, but how they thought, how they acted, and how they saw the world. It made them bold, it made them brave, and it made them believe in the power of change. Many iconic figures of this time, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Gloria Steinem, have acknowledged the significant role that rock and roll played in the social changes of their era. It was the soundtrack to a revolution that reshaped the world. Rock and roll was more than just music for the baby boomers. It was a cultural force, a voice of rebellion, and a defining feature of their generation. The influence of rock and roll didn't stop with the baby boomers. It continued to shape the music industry and popular culture for decades to come. Its echoes are heard in the rhythms of soul, the rebellious streak in punk, the anthems of pop, and even the beats of hip-hop. But more than just influencing genres, rock and roll has become a symbol of freedom, individuality, and youthful rebellion that resonates even today. There's a unique bond between the baby boomer generation and rock and roll. They grew up with it, they danced to it, they fell in love to it. And they pass this love down to their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the spirit of rock and roll lives on. From its birth in the 1950s to its enduring influence today, rock and roll has left an indelible mark on music and society. And for the baby boomers, it will always be the soundtrack of their youth, a testament to a time of change and rebellion.